And AT, you should be ready. Take it away.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Hopefully you got to meet some new folks and have some good conversation there in the breakout sessions. Super excited to have Rachel and Ashish join us again here 5 years later. So, what we'll do today is we'll talk through just a little bit of some of their background pre-starting the business. I think it's interesting as part of the story. And then I think some of the origin story of how they come up with the ideas. And I think it'll be interesting to talk through some of the things that I heard them say 5 years ago when I went back and listened to it again to where they're at now and seeing all the journey. Because I think that's part of what this meetup is all about, is bringing folks on early in their business, sharing their stories, and then as they go on and do amazing things, them giving their time, coming back and sharing a lot of those lessons learned. So I appreciate you both joining us today. Well, maybe just to get started.
Yeah, thanks, AT.
Yeah. Well, maybe just to get started, I think you both have a healthcare background. So before you started a business, maybe just take a minute to talk about why you decided to get into healthcare and what you were doing in healthcare before you started. Maybe Rachel starts.
For sure. Yeah, I was a therapist, so worked in community mental health, still a therapist. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, have been one since 2008. And so was working in community mental health, serving the Medicaid population in the North Georgia areas of Georgia, Catoosa County, Ringgold, that area is where I'm from.
Great. Ashish?
Yeah, and a lot like Rachel, I was in practice as well. I was a clinical pharmacist at Atlanta Medical Center. And before that, how I actually got into healthcare was my first ever job. Actually, my first ever job was at McDonald's. My second ever job was at Northside Forsyth Hospital up in Forsyth. And I was a transporter there. And I was very low on the totem pole, but that's what made me fall in love with healthcare.
Yeah.
My first job was at Fazoli's, Ashish, and I still think it's like my second favorite job after Motivo. I'm like, I'd go back to Fazoli's in a heartbeat. Like the breadsticks were so good, and it was just like easy and fun.
Do they still have
same
Fazoli's
nostalgia
around here? I haven't seen one in a while.
I haven't seen a Fazoli's in a bit either. I don't know. Maybe not the company's not doing so well. I don't know.
Well, cool. Well, maybe, one of the things I thought was interesting, looking at the last one is the origin story that you both had from you were in the space and you kind of just felt and saw something. So maybe talk a little bit to our audience about what did you hear and see that make you said, you know what, this is a problem that I want to go start a business to solve.
Yeah, I can start. So for me, it wasn't really what I saw or heard as what I experienced myself. It was, the process of clinical supervision. So just in a nutshell, very similar to residency for a doctor, therapists have to complete 2 years of supervision under another therapist. You have to go and meet with another therapist for 2 years and talk about your clients and your cases, and you're actually working under their professional license for 2 years. And this is something that every therapist goes through, every social worker in every state across the country. And back then, when I was going through the process, supervision had to be in person, face to face. I'm from a rural area of North Georgia, Ringgold, and the closest supervisor was in Atlanta. So I was driving 2 hours each week to meet face-to-face with the closest supervisor. It's also your responsibility as a therapist to pay for your supervision hours. So I paid about $9,000 to get all the hours that I needed to become a licensed therapist. So kind of zoom out, like big picture, 57% of the people who get a master's degree in counseling never complete their licensure. So we're like at a time that like mental health needs are at an all-time like high. We're losing over half of the available supply of therapists like in the licensure process. So I noticed that states started passing rules to allow supervision virtually. Georgia changed theirs in 2016. This is after I was already a license, and I thought like, it would have made it so much easier for me if I could do it virtually, and Georgia started to allow virtual supervision. So that's what gave me the idea for Motivo.
Awesome.
Yeah, mine's pretty similar. I think maybe it speaks to being able to see a startup idea in practice and kind of spot opportunities. But I was noticing that we were all doing redundant work as clinical pharmacists. And this was manual, and it was expensive for us as clinical pharmacists to keep looking up the same answers to the same questions. And so I always thought, why couldn't we build one single source of truth and let all of these people get back to work? And so that's how we started, was just with that hypothesis in 2018. And we were humans doing it. We were humans building that source of truth, like pharmacists answering questions for other pharmacists. And then eventually AI came along and allowed us to become more efficient at it, which I'm sure we'll get into in a bit. But that was the origin, was really without AI in mind at all. Was just thinking, how could we as pharmacists help other pharmacists get back to work a little bit easier?
Yeah. So this is interesting that I think both of you were a part of the healthcare system. You saw something that you personally experienced and said, hey, I could go start something here and do this. So let's jump into that for a minute. Obviously, a lot of people struggle to even make that first, they see a problem, but struggle to make the jump to start. And then how crazy it is when you make that jump to go after it and then realize, oh boy, what have I gotten myself into? Tell us about those early times of you decided to go after it, and like how you started to either feel like, hey, I'm glad I went to pursue this idea, or like, there's no way this is going to work. How did you start feeling if this was an idea that was worth pursuing?
For me, I created an MVP. I did not know what that word meant. I learned that later, that that's what I had created. But I thought, what is the simplest way possible for me to test this idea and see if it's even interesting, or people would want something like this. So I remember my husband worked at a carpet company at the time, and they were redoing their website on Shopify and uploading all of these carpet samples to Shopify. And I was like, I could just do that. I could just buy that Shopify template and just upload supervisor profiles, clinical supervisor profiles, and write about the supervisor in the product description and just see if that works. And so that's what I did. I just made this Shopify MVP, connected people via Zoom. It was super awkward and very, very, very manual. But I think we got to our first 5,000 in monthly revenue, and probably, I don't know, 20, 30, individual therapists using the platform, just using that Shopify site. And that got the interest of Techstars Atlanta enough for me to be able to get in and kind of build the company from there. So, I think the lesson that I learned in that is what's the don't over engineer your idea. What's the simplest way to test whether or not there's market opportunity there for you before investing in a whole bunch of engineers to build something.
I love that. And Rachel, tell me, what kind of feedback did you get from those early folks using that MVP that kind of got you more confident to say, hey, there is some authentic demand for this. We can build something here.
Yeah, I think for any therapist who's been through the supervision process, they know how hard it is. So it was harder to convince investors and other people that this is a real problem than it was to convince our industry. People signed up really quickly, and the B2C side of the platform grew quite naturally in the early days. Supervisors were all over it because people who do supervision, they're therapists as well, but they, like to supplement their clinical work with some supervision time as well. So we were the first supervision platform. There's nothing like this that had existed before us, because it was really based on recent legislation. So supervisors, began to sign up for it pretty quickly, and we got good feedback.
Awesome. I want to come back to that B2C and B2B conversation here in a minute. But Ashish, from your end, as you decided to go after this idea, how did you start early on figuring out if this was an idea, worth pursuing, or if there was something there?
Yeah. Oh, taking you back to our ideas, I was sick of answering the same questions over and over and over again. And so I had a personal database myself just to keep all my previous work straight. And my wife is a pharmacist, and she has her own database to keep her stuff straight. But neither one of us is actually going to trust each other. We're married, and neither one of us is still going to trust each other to use each other's database. And so this was like the central problem, is like all of us are looking up the same answers to the same questions, but can we trust each other to be able to lean on each other's work? And so what we did is we interviewed 1,000 pharmacists before we actually started. Like, it's one thing to have two data points, but my co-founder and I, before we actually wrote any code at all, we set out for a whole year and just talked to people. And we were like, what would it take? Like, how would these answers have to be structured? What kind of quality would have to go into that? How would you even measure that quality? And that's what we learned from those. And then how much time are you actually spending doing this manually as well? Like, how big of a problem is this for you? It's a whole lot easier to build a startup when they're screaming at you, this is a huge problem, versus like, oh, I feel this and my wife feels this, but this is not really that big of a problem. And so after those 1,000 interviews, we really figured out, gosh, this is a huge problem. And we see a solution. We see how we can build a solution here. They've told us, they've given us a roadmap of like, this is what it should be. And so that's when we started building, and then we learned and iterated. And one more thing I just want to tell you with this story that's like a uniquely Atlanta, or like a uniquely Atlanta tech village part of this is, it's one thing then to just be like, okay, we're going to launch our MVP and people will love it. And they did organically. But it's a whole nother thing to get to the buyer. And we had the hardest time being able to get to a buyer. We could get to users. We couldn't get to who was going to pay for those users. And I actually worked at that hospital, Atlanta Medical Center. I mentioned that we had kind of put this out and let people test. And a tenant executive just happened to be walking by Atlanta Tech Village. I think he knows AT and David pretty well. But just the serendipity of it all was like amazing. Like, he worked for the same health system that I happened to work at as a pharmacist. And I just tell him, like, this is what we're doing, and this is the traction that we have. And it was like almost the next day that like we get a call from like C-suite, like, hey, come in and tell us what you're doing, and we'd love to see the data. And that's how we got our first in. That was how we got our first hospital contract. That hospital contract then led to a health system contract, and then the rest has been a whole lot easier. But that first yes, I can actually credit back to Atlanta Tech Village, which is pretty neat.
Cool. So I think I want to pause for a second. You both said something I think is pretty powerful for the entrepreneurs to hear, is like, there's a difference when you're talking to potential customers and like they're answering your questions in discovery, but they're not really feeling the problem, versus I think Rachel and Ashish, you both kind of said they were leaning in. Like, Rachel, the therapist wanted this, like they needed this. And Ashish, you're like, man, this was a real problem that they wanted to be solved. And just the power of feeling that in discovery, I think is super important, because we can sometimes fool ourselves as entrepreneurs that, oh yeah, this would be cool tech and this would be a cool problem to solve. But like, when your potential customers feel that, I think that's quite powerful.
Yeah, I think too, there's like real problems that people are solving that may not be like scalable, problems. Like, I think that's the piece of it that determines, like, I'm sure we're going to get into this, but should you fundraise, and would investors be in, like, and that really, it's a big question, because it determines what path you need to go with the business. Like, if the company's not scalable, it really doesn't matter how many people are like, I like this product, like it has to like reach the level of scale that investors would want to see. And I think that's like a big question to figure out in the early days that kind of gets you to product market fit.
Yeah, I definitely want to touch on the fundraising side here in a little bit, but let's touch on the customer segment side. Because I think, Ashish, you alluded to this a little bit with sort of user versus buyer, and I want to get your thoughts on that, because I know a lot of people feel that challenge. And Rachel, you mentioned it starting B2C, and I know you guys have evolved to B2B as well. Maybe Rachel, start us off with how you first thought about B2C and B2B, and what you've learned to where you're at now across those segments.
I'll just say, like, my own bias here is that I think it's very like hard to scale a company with B2C only, especially in healthcare. It just is. And I also want to say, like, this is like a sample size of one. This is just my experience. And so I definitely could be wrong on like anything that I say today. I'm just like sharing what I experienced. But B2C just, it's hard. You have to find every single person that needs supervision. It's like a lot more manual. So we did B2C for the first couple of years, and I didn't even really think there was an opportunity for us to do B2B, because and B2B in mental health is anybody who hires therapists. So think like Talkspace and BetterHelp, but also your community mental health organizations, treatment centers, hospital systems, health plan payers. All of those people hire therapists. Many of them hire what we do, which is pre-licensed therapists, like therapists working towards their licensure. So most of those organizations were providing supervision in-house, and we didn't know that they would be interested in replacing their internal supervisors with Motivo supervisors. And we began to learn that they would. So, I mean, I think I first sold the Motivo to my own employer. Georgia Hope is where I worked for a number of years in community mental health. They saw the need from it. Their problem is that the community mental health organizations, these are like Medicaid serving organizations. Community mental health means that you provide your therapy services in people's homes, because they usually don't have transportation to get to your appointment. So it's really working with a very vulnerable population. And you're billing Medicaid mostly. Those organizations have a very hard time attracting fully licensed therapists. They don't pay that much. Starting salaries like $30,000 a year for a master's level therapist. So they couldn't keep clinical supervisors who are fully licensed. And so they wanted to kind of outsource their supervision to Motivo. So that's really what got us into the B2B space. Now 80% of our business is B2B. We still do B2C, but most of what we do is B2B.
And Rachel, how did people use the word product market fit a lot, and people means different things to different people. What did that sort of mean for you, and how did you start feeling that you were getting that product market fit across the segments?
I mean, how I've always heard product market fit explained is like 1 million in net revenue. So that's when I felt that we got there, is when we had enough demand for the product and we were getting more and more interest in B2B. I think that the other thing that worked really well for Motivo is we have probably the thing that's going the best for the company on the commercial side, is that our customers grow exponentially. So like we sign one customer and maybe they just need a few supervisors, and then they eventually transition their whole entire workforce to Motivo. So the growth within our existing accounts was pretty rapid. So when we saw our customers coming back for more and more and more and telling their friends about it, other organizations, we felt like that was product market fit for us. But I would say we're still early days in product market fit as well. But yeah, that was for us.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. Ashish, maybe can you talk for a minute about your experience with users versus buyers, and who your ideal customer is?
First of all, I totally agree with Rachel. So N of 2 here. B2B seems so much easier than B2C. I think it feels like we're playing on easy mode in some ways. Versus companies that I see that are going B2C are playing startups on hard mode. And for us, this wasn't intuitive either. It's like you talk to all these users, they scream at you, we've got this problem. Okay, we'll build this solution for you. We learn, iterate. Oh, okay, well then you should be able to pay for it. But the problem, I think, especially in healthcare, is that clinicians, especially if you're building a clinician tool, don't feel like they should pay out of pocket for tools that should make their job better. Their employer should pay for those. And so that's what led us towards B2B. And I suspect that many of you are on a similar journey, where it's like you're building for someone, and then that someone says, hey, I don't actually innately feel like I should pay for this. Someone else should pay for this on my behalf. And I actually feel like that was a blessing in disguise, because it, like Rachel, let us play a whole different game. In B2B, the buyer doesn't change. They just tell you what they want, and you just build that, and it just remains the same. And we've seen the same kind of thing as Rachel, in the sense that because they just stay the same year to year, they just naturally want to expand seats at that point. Now contrast that to B2C, where you kind of, it's a lot like my brother's got a startup. He went to tech and built a B2C startup, and it's in fashion. And every season he has to stay ahead of the fashion. They have to stay ahead of these tech folks, or have to learn the new fashions, believe it or not. And I can't think of anything worse. That would just be very, very hard. And so I actually love our evolution into B2B. One thing I'll say on product market fit, just because you mentioned it, is, and it kind of relates here, is I think a lot like Rachel, we started to see it after Million. I've seen it really more as like, it's hard to define product market fit, but you just know when you have it. And that was a good metric for us, is in revenue. Like soon after Million, we just felt like every customer is like we're a hammer in their nail. And everything just started to make sense. But I also think you can fall out of it. I don't think that this is a destination. I think that this is something that it's a lot like surfing, or it's a lot like REM, in the sense that you can get into it, but you can easily get out of it. And so I think we're probably both in a fortunate situation now where we're going into scaling, but we have to be careful as we scale that we keep an eye on a customer.
So Ashish, let me ask one more question on that, and then we'll jump into the fundraising side, since you both have experiences there. You mentioned product market fit is always evolving, and like to your point, what worked yesterday doesn't necessarily work today. Talk us through how you see your product roadmap and your vision and your strategy evolving. Maybe if you have some anecdotes over those last 5 years, how you've seen that change or evolve. And any advice for entrepreneurs of how to be aware and keep changing.
Yeah, well, I can tell you one thing I wanted to reconnect on is that we started as pharmacists just trying to help each other get home at a reasonable hour, and really had no thoughts around AI. 5 years ago, if you watched the recording back, I doubt I even mentioned it, and now it seems imperative that we embrace it. And probably all of us. I think that it used to be where like you would need a web strategy. Like even if you're a law firm, you need a web strategy. You need like a website. And now I think it's imperative that we all have an AI strategy, even if you're barely touching AI. And I think in healthcare, they're not quite screaming this at us yet, because we're very conservative industry. Like we're laggards in a lot of ways. But I believe that this is the next 5 years will be dominated by interesting use cases of AI and it'll touch all of our products. So it's hard for me to give specifics here, but I think that's probably the wave that we're riding here, and how we can continue to evolve in ways that I don't know that I can predict today. But what I do know is that we need to keep listening to customers. I think a lot of companies stop doing that when they move from product market fit to growth. And that's what I don't want to do. At least we're just in that stage. I can't promise you that in 5 years we'll be a success, but what I can promise you is that we'll keep listening to them.
I think for me, the company really experienced a ton of tailwinds because of COVID. I actually don't know that Motivo would have been successful if it hadn't been for COVID, because it was huge for us in this set. And obviously, like I say that knowing that it was like detrimental to society, but what it did for healthcare regulations in terms of virtual care and accessibility really pushed it forward way more than it would have if the pandemic didn't happen. So there were a lot of regulations against virtual supervision before the pandemic. Like in California, you could only do it if you worked in a nonprofit, but not in private practice. In New York, you couldn't do virtual supervision at all. And they had no intention of changing those regulations. And COVID pushed them to put in temporary allowance for it. And then they realized like, oh, this actually works and there's no detriment to the patient or anything like that by doing virtual supervision. So they wrote it into full-time role. So that really helped us like, have a more confidence in the fact that virtual supervision is here to stay, and it gives a lot more, opportunity for us to continue to build in this space. So I would say we got lucky. And I think a lot of Motivo's success is getting lucky, 100%. Like, I think it's timing and it's luck. I think all founders like work equal amounts of hard, like it's, I mean, I don't want to downplay the work that I put into the company, but I think that, mostly for companies, it's like, did you build the right thing at the right time? And, did you stay focused on your goal? And I love what Ashish says around, continuing to listen to customers all the way. I think that's hugely important.
I will pause there because you both touched on an interesting point around just industry dynamics and timing, right? That I think this is a common theme that we see across entrepreneurs. As Rachel said, you spend just as much time and effort building a $1 million business as a $10 million business. It's hard and a lot of effort, but sometimes you catch those industry tailwinds. And so I know, like, for us in our studio, one of the things we always try and talk about, what are some of those industry tailwinds or themes around an idea that you can then dig in and try and uncover a problem there that, hey, there's a hypothesis that something could change, whether it's, AI for you, Ashish, or the industry regulations around virtual, Rachel, that like, you have to get a little lucky to catch some of those. But if you're in the right spot and catch the right timing, some pretty good things can happen. Well, let me transition to the fundraising side. I know there have been some questions in the chat, and I know you both experienced this. And again, funny enough, listening back, I think last time you were just getting going on the early fundraising. Rachel having gone through Techstars, I think your first round, and Ashish with Mercer and getting going. And since you've both have gone on to raise additional funding, maybe just talk a little bit about how you thought about fundraising and did you need to do it or not, and some of the lessons learned on the fundraising trail over the past 5 years.
I think about fundraising as little as possible because I hate it. It's awful. It was really hard for us, super, super hard. I think I raised my seed, the 2.2 million, over 18 months. So many no's, so many no's. And I think, we had a very hard time answering the question, how big can this thing get? Because we were solving what investors saw as a very niche problem. I think that, again, like, luck and timing shows us that, like, workforce has become the biggest problem in healthcare, and particularly in mental health care. So those kinds of tailwinds were in our favor. But when we first started and when I was first explaining the problem, it felt like a very niche problem. I got told a lot, like, this sounds like a lifestyle business. It was pretty distracting for me in the sense that investors were asking me, go find other product iterations for Motivo that can make you guys $1 billion company. And this is just my own opinion, but I don't think there's a whole lot of unicorn status companies in healthcare. It's just like not something that happens. And there's definitely not a lot of buyers for unicorn level companies. So if your plan isn't IPO, which I never was interested in IPOing, I just don't think Motivo is that kind of company. If we wanted to grow a profitable, business, that's not something that investors were interested in 2 years ago. It was like growth at all costs, get bigger, get bigger, get bigger. My idea around, like, let's stay focused on the core problem that we're solving. It was definitely met with, like, you're not thinking big enough. We want you to go big, go big. So I would say another thing that worked in Motivo's favor around timing was that the market shifted, around fundraising, and growing a profitable, responsible company is now more what investors want to hear. And I think if it was still kind of this growth at all costs, like, what's your path towards IPO landscape, I don't know that we would be, that investors would be that interested in us. So we raised the seed, ran out of money, obviously, ready for the Series A, raised a $14 million Series A in 2020. Also super hard, also a lot of no's, got the worst term sheet I've ever seen, truly, like 3.5x participating preferred term. This was just when the market was starting to downturn. Cox saved us. Cox Enterprises led both our seed and Series A. We didn't have like these like blue chip investors that everybody wants. Not that people don't want Cox, but people don't think of Cox as like a healthcare investor all that much. So, it was like, might look like we're doing really well, now, but it was not easy. And I would say only recently it's been like, oh, wow, things are looking good for the future of the company. Most of the last 5 years have been, I don't know if this is going to work.
Yeah, ours is very similar. You guys missed that I was complimenting Rachel. She doesn't have the grades I do, but our story is very similar over the last few years. And overall, I just want to say that probably this is a good thing, because I think a lot of companies will raise too much and then make decisions that are counter to the company's best interests when they've done that. And so actually looking back, especially to Rachel's point, in healthcare especially, there's plenty of examples of companies that have done that, but there's not that many good examples of companies that have played the game, maybe PillPack, and won it. And I think that makes it hard for us, but actually I think that's a blessing in disguise, because probably you don't need that much money anymore for most of us to be able to do what we want to do. It just means that we're going to do it a little bit slower. And so probably the right answer is raise a modest amount or bootstrap as long as you possibly can, and then only raise when the timing is right. And I think this mentality is ingrained in us in Atlanta or the Southeast. It looks like where most of us are from. But I think this is pretty foreign to people in more capital-rich parts of the world. And so I actually think that this is very, very helpful for us. But at the time, it didn't help. When you're raising, it doesn't necessarily help if someone tells you that, oh, it's probably good for you to hear no's. But we did YC, that helped. After Mercer, we did Y Combinator. Much like Techstars, if any of you are in that boat of like trying to raise $1 million or 2 million, I would advise doing something like that, because it especially for people that are doing this for the first time, it sort of puts a forcing function around it to where you're just meeting a lot of people at once, and it's an easier way to get a round done. And so I think probably both Rachel and I are thankful for having done that. But then you're on your own after that, and that's when it really gets hard. And we've had ups and downs, but we just raised 6 million seed a few months ago, and our plan is to not raise again. Our plan is to be able to. Probably the difference is our TAM is maybe a little larger. Like we think we can take on UpToDate. It's $1 billion ARR business. We think we can take on WebMD. It's much bigger than that, but I think we can get there the whole entire way. And I think that 2024 is a unique time to be able to preach that message. As Rachel said, investors are thinking of this different, but also with development tools and the fact that AI is like now our 10x co-pilot, I think you can do a whole lot more with less. And that didn't ever used to be the case.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, love the stories there in fundraising, how hard it is. And again, entrepreneurs, just to learn and see, just because you get a no from an investor doesn't mean you aren't building a great business and can't continue to build a great business, as Rachel and Ashish have shown. Any other questions here the last couple of minutes? Put something in the chat. We'll try it calling out, but I've got one last question here as we get close to wrapping up here. We talked about a lot of things from, the founding idea to product market fit to fundraising. Any other nuggets or lessons learned that you'd have for the audience that we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, go ahead, Ashish, while I think of one.
Okay, I was going to say usually it's ladies first, but I realize that that's always tough when you're on the spot. So I'll try to give my imparting wisdom here. Is I think it's way harder than everyone thinks it is. I at least in my mind it was. And then it's like one step at a time, and you realize like we're all doing it. I think collectively this whole room is doing it. Virtual room is doing it. So I'm just happy to commiserate and rub elbows with you guys. And for all of us, let's get after this year.
I think for me, I think one of the most important roles for the CEO is to be as decisive as possible, as quickly as possible. If like I could think about like what has helped Motivo be successful, it has been, identifying what's not working as quickly as possible and like course correcting, and like that especially mostly goes with hiring. What you need as a company is like very different it's almost a different company every single year, or maybe every single 6 months, And so I even approach my own role like that. And I tell my team this, like, there might be a day when the board is like, Rachel's not the CEO, that we need to take us from 5 million to 10 million, or from 10 million to 100 million. And that would be just fine with me, because it's about the company being successful, And so the ability to kind of iterate yourself and to be what the company needs in the next phase is something you have to do as the founder CEO, but it's also something that your team has to do as well. And, it might look like in Silicon Valley, there are people who just like are, specialize in getting companies from pre-seed to seed. And then they move on to another company. And then from like seed to Series A, because it's like such a specialized problem that, like, in those different phases, it's such a different kind of company that you're leading during those stages. So I would say just like be super open to that sometimes your startup team isn't your scale up team, and being open to that.
I think that's a great point, Rachel. And also even just to the underlying message, like, look, your role does change as CEO from the idea stage to the product market fit stage to the scaling stage. And like, we can all look ourselves in the mirror and we're probably really good at certain things and not good at other things. And how do you fill those gaps on your team with other team members, advisors, folks that can help you in those areas? Because it is so hard, as both of you have shown, and having a great team there can be a part of that.
For sure.
Well, great. Well, Ashish and Rachel, thank you so much. Loved all the great conversations and advice today, and appreciate you circling back 5 years later and sharing your journey, and excited to see where you'll be in another 5 years from now. As we wrap up, just want to give you guys a couple upcoming dates that we've got coming up here. You can always visit atlantaventures.com healthcare and stay connected to other companies that are looking there. Upcoming events, there's some tag event on the 23rd. We'll have a startup combos on the 7th. And in March, we'll have another healthcare meetup. We're looking for a couple startups to present what they're working on, similar to what Rachel and Ashish did 5 years ago. So if you're early in your journey and want to share with the audience, feel free to reach out to us. You can send us an email to marketing@atlantaventures.com or fill out a form on the website. Last thing I'll say, just wrapping up, hiring needs real quick. Ashish and Rachel, any big hiring needs that you're looking for, you want to put the group on in case they know of anybody?
Not for us. Not right now. Staying lean.
We've got 2 NLP ML engineer and then a clinical pharmacist. And both those job descriptions can be found on ImpharmD.com/jobs. I'll put it in the chat as well.
Got it. Thanks, Ashish. Well, again, thank you everybody for joining us so early this morning, especially Rachel and Ashish. Hopefully you all took something away from this, and we'll post a recap here in the next couple days. But hope you all enjoy the rest of your day and stay warm.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks.
Have a great day. See you guys.